Since I know many of you are joining our session for the first time, my name is Tony Yang. I run the growth practice at Mucker Capital. We're an early stage venture firm primarily focusing on the seed and Series A. We also operate an accelerator program for founders that are at the very beginning of the founder and startup journey. And head of growth, that role just basically means I get to spend a lot of my time with the founders that we invest in to help them scale their go-to-market, their growth, marketing, sales, product, etc. But I'm really not the focus of attention for today. We are super excited to have Donya Rose, who is the managing principal of the Signal Group, join us to talk about compensation. This is their jam. All right. So I'll let Donya introduce herself a little bit more. But again, I'm super excited. You guys definitely take notes, even though we're going to be providing the recording. There's a lot that's going to be covered in today's session. So super excited to have you, Donya. Thank you for joining us. And the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Tony, and welcome everybody. My introduction to myself will be very brief. I'm a sales compensation plan design consultant. That is the beginning and end of what I've done professionally for a couple of decades now. I have a lot of passion for this topic, and one of the things I'm most passionate about is helping businesses that are just starting into getting their first sales team going avoid some of the typical wrong turns that often aren't problematic in the first year or two, but that can lead to some real issues down the road. So I'm hoping to get a foundation of key sales comp plan design principles and best practices under you so that you will know what to do when. The right comp plan for your first seller is probably not the same plan as the right comp plan for your fifth seller or your 50th seller. But the principles are rock solid and apply to all of those cases. And so if you really understand them, you're going to know what to do and or when you need help. So that's kind of my overarching storyline here. I do lead a small consulting firm. I have been actively involved with the profession for years. I'm closely involved with World at Work. World at Work, for those of you who aren't HR people, is the biggest compensation and benefits professional association in the world. And I love this phrase. They consider themselves the keepers of the body of knowledge of sales compensation. So there you go. And in particular, they certify sales compensation professionals. They teach it. I've helped write the questions for the certification exam. And what you're going to see me sharing with you here in terms of the words and the concepts and the philosophies stays close to what they would be telling you. So I did not make this stuff up all by myself. I'm sharing with you what sales compensation professionals and consultants worldwide who know what they're doing and are good at what they do, they would probably all tell you similar things. I'm showing it to you through the lens of an early stage business, but this is not Donya's point of view. This really is a settled perspective. All right, so with all of that foundation under us, let's start talking about sales compensation. First thing is just to really get a clear statement in mind about what sales comp does. So most salespeople, certainly not all salespeople, but most of the salespeople in the world are paid some kind of variable pay based on what they've sold. So why do people do that? There's a lot of reasons people do it. And I honestly think one of the reasons a lot of people, especially in early stages, do it is because everybody else is doing it. But it's good to understand what sales compensation really is valuable for creating in a business. If you have a variable pay plan that works well, what does your business get for that? And the answer, I'm going to focus on the left side of this slide first, is in four areas, really three with one kind of caveat. So the right sales compensation plans actually cause your salespeople to be more motivated to do the things you need them to do than they would have been without that sales compensation plan. So it's a little extra oomph in their effort. The next and probably most important thing the sales compensation plan does is focuses them on the most important sales. Most sellers, not all the time, and certainly not sometimes in long tenured sales organizations in large companies, but most sellers in an early stage business are working pretty hard. The question is, are they pursuing the right customer categories? Are they selling the right profile of offerings at the right deal terms, with the right deal size? and the right configuration and collaborating appropriately with others inside the organization. So not every single sales dollar is equally valuable to the business. Some of them are higher margin than others, but more importantly, some of them have more strategic value than others. So the superpower of the right sales comp plan is that it focuses that sales effort. You've got your motivated people, okay, they're ready to go do stuff. Now we want to focus them on the most important sales. We also want them working in a way that we want them working. So this doesn't mean we all want all selling to be collaborative. It means we have an idea of how we want this stuff sold. So maybe this one thing you sell, you only want sold with a product specialist involved so that you make sure you get the thing configured correctly from the outset. And maybe these other things that you sell, you really don't want the salesperson hauling in a whole phalanx of people from your organization. They should be able to do it themselves. So the way you put the plan together is going to tell your salespeople the way you want them selling, collaboratively or individually, and it can be different for different ones of your offerings. And finally, we say to create value. So what does that mean? We want to be sure your sales comp plans provide you with a reasonable return on what you're spending all over the place in the comp plan. So for the first dollar sold, for the first dollar over quota, for the first dollar of your specialized product offering, you want to be sure that on the margin, the sales compensation plan is creating value for the business. Now, I'm not going to go into it, but another thing I love about this slide is over here on the right, it's almost like a diagnostic for your comp plans. So if your salespeople aren't sufficiently motivated, then that's probably because there are issues with your risk reward balance. You're not offering enough upside for the overperformance, or they don't actually understand their plans. The compensation mechanics are too complex. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but this can actually help you if you already have a comp plan and you're concerned about it. You can identify the area in which there's a problem. You could look over here on the right and see what plan feature you might need to be looking at in order to fix it. So that's not the point of what I wanted to talk to you about today, but I left it in there just because that's kind of fun. So anyway, that's the very high level overview. When you're designing a sales comp plan, there are a lot of steps. We're going to be focusing primarily on the first 5 on the top row, but I want to acknowledge that there's a lot more to it. So we've got to get the right roles and eligibility. You've got to have the right pay structure. You've got to measure the right things in the right proportions. You've got to have the right plan type and the right payment timing and measurement timing. And then you have to have payout tables and curves. If you had all of those things and had them and you knew what you thought you wanted to do, I'm just going to acknowledge the next thing you need to do is test it. Make sure that it produces the right outcomes in terms of the cost of comp and the amount people get paid over a reasonable range of possible selling scenarios. Then you need to come up with final detailed plans. You're going to maybe have to have it approved by somebody unless you own the whole company and you're designing the plans. And then you've got to document the plans so that you've actually got something that explains the plans, a written document. And then you've got to have a plan to get them paid and governed. So all of these other things have to happen. We're not going to talk much about those, but I want to acknowledge that. I also need to acknowledge there's stuff that goes before step 1 here. Sales comp is role-based comp. So if you don't have a clear statement about what the roles are, then you aren't going to be able, if you're in the place where you're trying to figure out what your go-to-market strategy is and what kind of sellers you need and what your sales organization should look like, and do I need a product specialist, and am I going to have an inside role and a field role, et cetera, get that straight before you start, because it's role-based comp, and until you have clarity about your roles, you're not going to be able to design the right comp plan. So there's all of that stuff that happens before step 1 here. All right. So with that introduction, let's start into it. I see the first question over here about risk reward balance. I promise you, we will get to that big time, but we're not ready yet.
Sure.
Okay, I want to point out that according to behavioral scientists, there are people out there. If you read Daniel Pink, for example, he's going to tell you that variable pay causes problems. But incentives and rewards, this is what the science tells us, are most effective when they're perceived by the employee to be beneficial to them and to the employer, so they don't feel like a punitive, scary thing. They are focused on challenging activities. This may seem obvious, but oddly, people will pay variable pay for things that salespeople are going to do anyway. So there's no point in putting out variable pay unless you're asking someone to do something that has two characteristics. One, it's valuable to the business, and two, it's hard to do. So by definition, those are the things you're going to be paying for. They need to be tied to specific, reasonable, objective, attainable standards of performance. So that may be your quota, but that's going to be really important. If you say that you have to do this, but it's really just not practical for a person in that position that you're hiring off the street to do it, you put a golden carrot out there that's out of reach. A golden carrot out of reach is not motivating, it's irritating. So goal setting is part of the art of this. We're not going to talk much about it today. I'm going to talk about plan design, but I'm just warning you that perfect sales comp plans with dopey goals are dopey comp plans. So it's really important. And then the last thing here is it needs to be accompanied by celebration of success. So it's not just about money, it's about recognition and celebration and sharing the learning about what worked and how we sold that stuff. And this is in a big box here. It's a quote from this book. There's a book called Rewards and Intrinsic Motivation that I don't recommend you read. It's very academic and complicated and strangely expensive, like it only comes in hardback and costs $80. But I read it for you, and these are the key takeaways. And one of the things in there is that reward systems, I'm just going to read it to you, that are discretionary, subjective, or based on the pleasing the people in charge are often seen as unfair and coercive. That's a big thing to keep in mind. So objective goal setting, performance management, et cetera, is really key. It's very tempting early in a business to say, I'm going to get to the end of the year and I'm going to just share part of what we have available with the people who help make it happen. And I'm going to be fair about it. Well, that's okay. That's a reward system, but that is not an incentive system. An incentive system has a do this, get that character to it that requires that you plant the goalpost somewhere, and when someone kicks something into that goal, something good happens for them. Okay. First step in that long 10-step process where we're going to cover the first 5 is eligibility, making sure you've got the right people in a sales incentive plan. So here are the 4 characteristics of the sales role that ought to be on a sales incentive plan where you can get value from it. First, direct influence over the buying decision is their day job. It's not something they occasionally influence. It's what they're there to do. Next, you can measure the productivity of individuals or small teams reliably, and that measurement is directly linked to financial results for the business. You're going to be paying people upside if they overperform. You have to be able to be sure that upside is worth it on the margin to the business. How do I make sure the upside is worth it on the margin if what I'm measuring is account plans, for example? Okay, delivering results is so important that you are going to pay incentives to those who kick it in the goal, even in a year when the company misses its goals. Now, you're absolutely going to have a management discretion clause in your plan doc that says if you have an absolute disaster, you have the right to change the plan, but you're going to do that 1 out of 20 years. The great majority of the time, you are going to pay, even if the company's in trouble. And then you want people in that role who have a taste for risk and upside. They have that tolerance for personal risk, and they're excited by the idea of handsome rewards. So we're not going to go all the way to saying what some people say, and I think it's kind of a mean thing to say about salespeople, that they're coin operated. I think they're more success and winning operated, and the money is part of a measure of that, but you want that kind of character in the role. So sales comp is expensive to design for you. It takes effort and energy. You've got to communicate it. You've got to administer it. You are going to expose yourself to a level of risk that you might end up paying out in a situation where the company's in trouble. You've got to be sure you're doing that in a situation where you're going to get a return. So you only want sales comp plans to be paid to roles with these characteristics. So that's your eligibility. All right, and this I'm not going to go through in detail. This is more in the tools category. When you get ready to design the comp plan, you have to be able to describe the selling role. This is an example of a role profile. It asks a number of questions. This is not everything you need to know to hire a seller. These are the things you need to know to design a comp plan. So these are the questions. What is the length of time from identification of opportunity to a closed deal? So sales cycle length. And you've got to have some kind of idea of what that is to get the comp plan right. So each of these things has to be clear in order for you to start designing the comp plan. And if you're arguing among yourselves about what the job is, it can be a useful exercise to do this. It can be useful to take this layout and put your 3 selling roles across the top and then, whoops, fill it in for each of your roles. So this is just a tool that's here for your use. So you got to know what the selling role is. They ought to be eligible. Now, once you've got all of that, we need to come up with a pay structure. So we're going to start into how would you know how much to pay? How would you know how much fixed and how much variable? So we're starting to answer that first question that came in the Q&A section. So this is just some words just to get us all grounded in the right words with the right meaning. One of them is, so you're going to have to get in your head for each role 3 levels of performance. So the first one is the target performance. What do we expect your typical person that you can hire in the world, and not the first year that they're there, but after they've really gotten their legs under them, what should they be able to sell and what do they need to earn? That's the at target performer. This is not a rock star. This is not a problem child. This is your middle of the road, doing just fine seller in the role. And then you need to get in your head what the rock star could do. This is not the best it's possible to ever do. If you had 10 people in the role, it would be what your top person did. If you had 100 people in the role, it would be top 10%. If it's 5 people in the role, it's the best anyone's going to do over a 2-year period. So 90th percentile performance, or very, very good, but not the best ever, excellence performance. And then you need to get in your head something we're going to call threshold performance, which is that level of performance below which we're not sure we need to keep that person in the role. And that's going to be really different for different roles. But usually, threshold and excellence are equally balanced around target, by which I mean if excellence performance is 150% of goal, then threshold is usually about 50% of goal. So they're usually equally balanced, although there are sometimes when they may not be. And that 50 to 150 would be a pretty typical range for an early stage company, new business seller. You expect a lot of variability around attainment. So not only do we have to know what they would produce, we have to have some concept of how much we want to pay them for getting to excellence or for threshold. So those are just words, and we'll talk about how you do that here in a sec.
Hey, Donya, could I interject with a question?
Please.
So in our business, obviously, we work with founders directly, and one of the things we work with them on is forecasting. Because, in order for a seed company to, let's just say, raise a Series A round, 9 months from now, they need to hit certain metrics. So this is a sort of a sales capacity question, sales capacity planning. Do you recommend that the forecast plan, when they're thinking about hiring, be tied to this productivity level of target or threshold? Does that make sense?
Target. It should be
Target.
the threshold is the level of performance below which you're going to fire that person.
Yeah,
So no, you target ideally probably target plus 10%.
got
I'm sorry. The sales target should be 10% higher than the fully allocated quota of the annual operating plan,
it. Perfect.
which
Awesome.
isn't exactly 90% of the annual operating plan,
Great.
because 1 over 1.1 is not 0.9. Anyway.
Thank you. It's great.
Okay. But yeah, target is what we expect the organization to do, a reasonable productivity expectation as a starting place. I'm not going to go through this slide, but this is another one that's in the betweens here to give you some details to look at when you're trying to figure out what target should be. Not going to read through it, but it's there for you. There's a lot of slides in this deck that are there for to support you later when you're trying to do this. Okay, now we've got that concept of target performance. And now we're going to talk about what are the ingredients that make a pay structure. So for a role, you need a concept of target cash. That's what that at target performer earns. Pay mix, which is how much base, how much variable, and leverage. That's what happens when I go over target. All those together make a pay structure. So we're going to go through those one at a time. So target cash compensation is cash from all payments. This is not a recommendation for a pay level or a pay mix. 100,000 is a nice round number where we can do math in our heads. And so If you have a base midpoint of 60,000 and a target incentive of 40,000, then target total cash or target cash comp would be 100,000. Here's some more about setting target cash. I'm not going to go through that. So let's start by the fact that you're going to expect, if you have a few people in the job, you're going to vary base higher or lower based on that person's capabilities, their long-term value for the business, where they should go in the role. Base is not something that changes year over year. And so it changes a little bit, I'll say maybe 3%, not dramatic change. So you set that carefully based on their skills, experience, leadership, long-term potential, persistent attributes of the person. You expect the variable pay to vary a lot. So if you had a target incentive of 40,000, you would expect if you have multiple people in the role, they might earn almost none of that if they're really close to threshold, or they might earn 2 or 3 times that if they're in that blowout position. So we expect base pay to vary a little bit from one person to the next and variable pay to vary a lot. And it's good to have a philosophy about that. So how do you know how much base and variable? Finally getting around to answering the question the first person to ask a question asked. And the primary answer to that question is role prominence. The degree to which the seller causes the things that you are measuring them on as opposed to everything else. So indicators of higher prominence is that this job takes a lot of the seller's sales initiative and creativity, their own individual skill, maybe even their own personal network. Lower prominence indicators include you've got the lowest price thing out there. There are lots of people involved in getting this thing sold. So it's not just the seller. You already have great collateral developed. You've got a strong brand and nobody would consider buying this thing without considering your offering, etc. So the more it depends on the seller, the more incentive rich the pay mix would be, up to 50-50. The more the success of the sale depends on things that are not the seller, everything else, the more base rich the pay mix would be, down to as low as 80-20. So the suggestion here is you keep your pay mix at target between 80-20 and 50-50. Now, obviously, a person who has got a 50-50 pay mix and significantly overachieves will have a de facto pay mix that's much more than half variable. But at target, it's 50-50. Key point is that the prominence is not a characteristic of a role. I mean, of an incumbent, it's a characteristic of a role. So we don't talk about account executive Susie is a high prominence seller, and account executive Joe is a low prominence seller. The account executive role is either higher or lower prominence, depending on how much it should depend on the individual versus all the other things that are going on. Also, prominence is not directly aligned with pay level. Some of your highest prominence roles, lowest prominence role, strategic large account manager, is also highly paid. So it's not the same as pay level or importance. It's just individual influence over outcomes.
Great. Could I
So
ask a question about that? Well, actually, you might
sure,
actually be
absolutely.
answering on this slide, but I'll just kind of maybe this could lead into this. So I know this is the thought process or the framework to consider. I guess two-part question. One is what do you typically see for companies that are, B2B SaaS, traditional B2B SaaS in terms of the split between base and variable? Just, common
Default answer is 50-50
50/50.
for the
Okay,
account executive.
got it.
For, I think, whatever you call it, solution specialist, solution engineer, product specialist. There's all kinds of other words for the sales support roles. They can
Yeah,
go, they can be 70-30, 60-40, usually not 80-20. Inside inbound role. I'm saying inside too
yeah.
many times. Maybe 80-20, inside outbound could even be 50-50.
Got it. And then do you ever see any comp plans where there's a heavy variable compared to a base mix? And is that
Yes,
advisable?
I see them, and it's usually dysfunctional. So
Okay.
that's the point of this slide. And you know what? We're going to not cover all the steps here, but I'm going to go slowly enough to really make the key points here, and we're going to
Great. Thank you.
be happy that we got through pay mix. So this slide, I think, is really telling on that exact topic. So here we've got 4 possible pay mixes. 0, 100. So that would be 100% variable pay, 50-50, 75-25, and 85-15, a little bit of variable pay. So what you see here is that the comp plan supports motivation really substantially over here, meaningfully in 50-50, somewhat in 75-25, and to be blunt, the comp plan is really not the main thing that this person is working for. They're working for their boss and the direction they're getting from the business. Responsiveness to company direction, however, goes the other way. So this person who's working for their boss and for the good of the business and not the comp plan is going to be very responsive to the boss and the good of the business. Around 75-25, we're still going to be willing to try a new strategy, sell a new product, and rearrange my customers and all the things that you need to do for the business. Around 50-50, I'm going to be somewhat responsive, but I'm going to have an eye on my comp plan all the time. 0, 100, you're going to find that that salesperson believes that their book is theirs. They're running their own business inside your company, and they are going to be very focused on doing what's best for them. So the attitude down here is the main point. I'm running my own business inside the company. The sale is mine. The customer is mine. Don't mess with my pay rates, my territory, my accounts. Over here, we're going to have an attitude 50-50 that I can't live on my base, got to earn my variable pay to pay my bills. Around 75-25, our attitude goes to, it really matters to me to make my goals, but maybe I'll fall a little short. I'll stick around next year, might be better. And over here, it's great that we have a bonus program, especially when it pays out. So the question to ask yourself is, where do you want your salesperson's attitude to be? I'm just going to take a moment to point out that very early stage businesses, when you hire that first seller, it may make sense to go for this person who's going to be running their own business inside your company. By the time you're looking for an exit, if you're considering buying a business, if what they've got is 10 rock star sellers who are all selling their own way and running their own business inside that company, who could leave and take the business with them, then you've got one valuation. If, on the other hand, you've got a selling system that you can plug people you can find in the world into and get pretty predictable outcomes, and you're consciously competent, you know what the value proposition is, and you know how to teach it, then that business has a higher value because the business is not at risk with the exit of a single rockstar seller. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So on that basis, you may have to start here, but as soon as you can, get yourself to a situation where the company owns the relationship with the business and the sellers are executing on the strategy the company has devised. And that means something more like a 50-50 pay mix. That answer your question?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So getting through the pay structure, now we've got our 60-40 pay mix, which, as I said, is not a recommendation, it's an example. And if the person who has that 60-40 pay mix is that excellence level performer and they earn another 40,000, this is just words again, we call that 40,000 leverage, and we're going to say that is a plan with a 2.0 leverage factor. So the total incentive at excellence divided by the incentive at target is 2. We've got a 2x leverage factor in that job. So I want to put this all together for you to make the point that that high prominence role with an aggressive pay mix. So I switched axes on you now. Now I've got percent of total compensation at target. So here we've got a person with an 80-20 pay mix and probably not as much comp as these other people, but at 100%, then we're going to give them a leverage factor of 1.5, which means if they really blow it out, they get another 50% of the amount they put at risk. Around 75-25, we'd have a 2x leverage factor. So that person gets to earn twice as much as they had at target when they're at excellence. And at around 50-50, you're usually going to have a leverage factor north of 2.0. So this one's showing a 2.5 example. So that person who really blows it out in this job with this pay mix is going to earn 2.5 times the amount they put at risk. So if you think about this like you're playing some kind of game, and you're taking what you could have earned elsewhere doing similar work, your market value, you're taking a piece of that and shoving it out on the table to play this sales comp game that you're putting in front of me. It only makes a lot of sense for me to shove out a lot of money if I could bring in even more if I do really, really well. So it's the managing that risk and reward. So another thing you'll notice is that in a well-designed plan, this is relatively expensive for the business. You've got to pay some meaningful acceleration over here to get them to a fair multiple on the amount they put at risk. So it should be worth it to the business because this person, this high prominence role, has got a lot of control over the outcome, and you want them to be able to get to their fully leveraged comp, but you got to have to pay them for it. And it's more expensive to pay that 2.5 leverage factor than it is to pay this 2.0 leverage factor on less at-risk pay. You would only do that if you think these people control the outcome. That gets us through the pay structure, and I think that may be a good place to start answering some of these questions. So we
Yeah.
haven't gotten through a whole lot of other stuff here.
No, there's one that just came in and I think is, right on timing, which is what strategies would you recommend from transitioning sellers from a less leverage role to a higher leverage plan? Would you advise adjusting down the base pay or other recommendations?
Well, if you've got that situation where you've got maybe the kind of the right amount of total comp, but just too much of it is in the base, then there are two basic pathways here. The really simple one, if you've got an 85-15 mix, as the example shows, and you want to go to a 70-30 mix, for example, and you've got 15 points in the wrong place, you could, over a 3-year period, give no base pay increase, put the whole increase into the variable side at 2x, move the whole thing by 5 percentage points a year, and after 3 years, you could be where you want to be. So you could do it by leaving base alone and putting the whole increase into the variable side. But that is a glacial movement for most early stage companies. So the other answer, you could do it by just adding comp. If you're underpaying versus market, you could just add comp on the variable side. That's usually not a great answer because that would mean you're overpaying. So the other answer, and you're going to have to follow me on this, is to do something called an earn through. So to do that, you take the comp let's just make a real simple example back to our 100,000, 85,000 in the base, 15 in the incentive at target, and we wish it were down here. So we wish it were 70-30. So we take the 15,000 that's currently in the base that we wish were in the variable pay. And we actually say we're going to calculate your variable pay based on 30,000. We're going to guarantee you the 85, but you have to earn through $15,000 that we're paying you before we pay you any incremental variable pay. So for 1 year, you're seeing what it looks like to live with a 70-30 plan. You're seeing the calculations. You're still guaranteed that base. At the end of that year, we're actually reducing your base pay to 70,000. You're now living on the 70-30 plan. We know you're going to be maybe looking out in the market and seeing what your options are if you don't like that. And we understand that, but you're not going to get your variable pay unless you're producing for us while you're doing that. At the end of that year, you can sign up to be on the program, or if you need to, you can move on.
Okay, great. And then someone just asked sort of the other way around, how do you move from 100% to 50-50 without creating double pay scenarios?
Well, yeah. So if you've got an old comp plan you've been managing under, that's what makes me think you've got double pay. So you've got some kind of commission plan. They've sold something this year. You feel like you're obligated to pay them at the same rate going forward next year. So if you go ahead and give them a base pay increase now at the beginning of next year, then you're going to be paying some of the stuff they sold this year at the higher rates, and you're going to be doubling up. So if that's the situation, one of the things I've helped businesses do in that situation is to, first of all, you can just let the tail run out and you can just pay more in the future for those things. But everything they sell for starting the moment they get the base pay increase is going to be paid at a lower rate. So you can calculate the cost to you of letting the tail run out. The other option there is to calculate what the tail the forward tail, you know what I'm talking about here, that's going into the future, what the forward tail would have been worth on your old plan versus your new plan, figure out the difference, buy out the tail delta at a discounted rate right now when you make the change. So people will often take 50 cents on the dollar to get the payment up front, buy out the tail, and then convert fully to the new plan at the same time that you make the base pay increase. So that's another idea.
Okay, let me ask one last question related to this topic, then let's move on because I know we got a lot to cover. So, how frequent, if at all, should an organization redefine compensation plans? Because I've been in companies in the past where it seems like the company is moving goalposts all the time, and so that obviously creates a not a good environment for the
Right.
sales team. So, in your perspective, should compensation plan be refreshed in terms of how the structure is set up, or are we just talking about certain targets and things like that that are changed?
Well, fundamentally, if you've got a well-designed plan, if you've got a plan that's a mess right now, you ought to fix it, regardless of how long it's been since you fixed it. But if you've got a well-designed plan, the plan, I think of it as kind of a control panel with knobs on it. So we've got a knob here for ARR, and we've got a knob for new business, and we've got a knob for multi-year or whatever your knobs are. And we're going to say we're going to pay more for preferred sales. We've also got a pay structure that's in place. Well, if suddenly multi-year is not important anymore because we think we want to be able to price up 2 years from now and we don't want to get locked in, or if we decide our best path to growth is to really go deep with our existing customers and we don't really want people focused so much on new business or whatever. We got knobs in place that we don't want anymore. Then there may be times when you're changing your strategy, when you want to rip out the console, change out the knobs, and say, we really are doing a different thing now. So I'm going to build a different comp plan. That usually happens every 3 to 5 years. But all the years in between, you're turning the knobs you've already installed. So just about every year, you're going to be saying, well, we want a little more emphasis on new business this year. Or we've got a product support specialist in place, and so we don't need the emphasis on that new product anymore because we're supporting it with an actual role that's going to help make it happen. So we're going to dial that one back a little bit. You're turning knobs, if you will, changing parameters, but you're not ripping out the knobs or putting in new knobs on a yearly basis. But every year, something probably needs a tweak. And that's a knob turn, not a knob replacement or a knob
Got it.
removal. Does
Great.
that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. So we're taking a few questions along the way. Tony, how much time do you want me to keep talking? Because I was planning to sort of stop talking for questions about 3 minutes ago, but we've taken some questions. Tell me what you want me to do.
Let's keep moving forward if you have
Okay.
additional areas to cover, and then we'll see.
Okay. All right. So now we have a pay structure, and the next thing to do is to assign measures. So now we know how much variable pay we're working with at target. And so we want to assign measures that are aligned with the key accountabilities of the role. From back there on the role profile, you wrote down the key accountabilities, directly influenced by the person, measurable with at least 2 quarters of history. There aren't a lot of comp plan emergencies, but the most reliable way to create one is to put a new measure in a comp plan that you haven't been measuring regularly for at least 2 quarters. And the one that most often comes up for that is deciding you're going to measure and pay people on profitability when you don't have your profitability measurement nailed down. 3 or fewer in number. So a comp plan with more than 3 measures is probably not going to, it's going to mean that at least one of them seems unimportant instead of important to the seller. So pick the 3 most important things and stay focused on them. Here's a general guideline for types of measures. Sales comp plans almost always need a volume measure. How much was sold? So that can be the booking, order, revenue, cash, ARR, whatever, how many of them, how many square feet, margin value, market share. They usually need a quality measure, which differentiates one sales dollar or one ARR dollar from another. So with the new customers, strategically important offerings, higher margin stuff. Sometimes they need a collaboration measure. You can have an individual measure and a team measure in the same comp plan of the same value so that you're paying the salesperson to work together with other people. Lead referrals can be a collaboration measure. And rarely, but sometimes you need future focused measures. So this is for people with maybe a 2-year sales cycle, where what you're going to have to measure is progress in long cycle selling rather than results, because they may be doing their job perfectly and not getting a closed deal this year. You can measure pipeline, sometimes customer satisfaction, but that makes me nervous because I think you blow up the measure when you do that sometimes, because the salespeople are going to make sure it looks good and now you don't know what's going on. So that's just some guidance about what types of measures. Once you've got your measures identified, you need to assign weights to the measures or use a relative rate plan, which we're not going to go into here in this webinar. But if you're interested in it, go to my website, type relative rate in the search bar, and that will show you a different approach, which is oftentimes the better approach for early stage SaaS companies. But it's too complicated to go into in this webinar, but there's a whole 1-hour webinar that you can find for free on the website that will explain it to you. Anyway, assuming you're not going relative rate, once you've got your measures, you need to assign weights to your measures. How do you decide how much weight you put on the different measures? And the answer is how much time you want them spending on that. So if you have a role where you want somebody spending 2 days a week on new business and the rest of the time supporting existing customers, then you would put a 60% weight on existing customer sales and a 40% weight on new business sales, even though the new business sales are going to be much smaller relative to those weights than the existing customer sales. Regardless, never weight anything under 20% of the total, because that sends the unimportant message to the seller. And I'm speaking in all caps now, everything funded out of the incentive at target. There sometimes can be an inclination to say, well, we're going to have the core comp plan, and then I'm just going to add 1%, a 1% commission for new business. Well, that's nice. And you're telling yourself you're making it all upside, but you're also sort of pretending that you're manufacturing sales capacity out of thin air. The discipline of having to take 100% of total comp at target and say which things I want to do, understanding that if I do more of one thing, I will do less of another, is a useful discipline in order to get yourself to a balanced plan that makes sense for the business. So you get all your weights assigned, and then you're ready to start designing actual payout tables and payout curves. So let me stop and see if this is another place we could take some questions. Do we have
I
any?
don't see any questions related to this area just yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. First, you may argue with me on this, but this is the first seriously nerdy slide. So this is
Love it.
payout curves, and it's important to understand your options for payout curves. So a payout curve shows how much you're going to pay as a function of how much people have done against their goals. So for all of these curves, actual percent of goal is the horizontal axis, payout percent of target incentive comp, TIC, is the vertical axis. For every single curve, we pay nothing or no sales. We pay 100% of target at 100%, 100% of target at 100% of goal. But there are different things happening here. So for this one, this is just the world's simplest comp plan. It's a straight rate. It can just 3% of everything you sell could be the comp plan. The more you sell, the more you earn at the end. And then at some point you say, wait a minute, nobody really cares about the goal. Nothing happens when they get to goal. So I'm going to pay a bump. I'm going to give you a $3,000 quota attainment bonus when you get to goal. So now you've got that little discontinuity in the curve. A better answer than that, binary payouts are not a great answer. A better answer is an accelerated rate once you go over goal. So you'll notice that this one pays 2 times target at 150% of goal. So if it's a new business role, that's probably a 2.0 leverage factor, right? So you may want to do that. Then you may say, well, I want to, here I'm feeding the eagles. Maybe I want to also starve the turkeys. So that would be underpaying for underperformance. So I may pay less than 50% at 50% of goal, or I may pay nothing up to 50% of goal. That's the kind of mechanism you might use in, for example, a renewal component, where if you pay from first dollar for renewals, but the truth is it would be an absolute screaming, unbearable disaster for your business if renewal rates were below 75%. then you might want to pay nothing for up to 75%. This is a 50% example, and start paying at 75%. So that's an example of where you might put a hard threshold in. You also may just want to underpay for underperformance like this. And then the last option to consider is deceleration over excellence. So what this says is maybe getting to 150% of goal would be fabulous, but people who get beyond that, we're going to go ahead and conclude that maybe if you get over 150% of goal, it's because you had a windfall situation, possibly take one with help from leadership, possibly at reduced margins because it was so important for the business, or maybe the goal was dopey, or maybe economic conditions conspired to give you a win. But if you get over 150, we're glad you got there. We're not going to cap your plan, but we don't necessarily think we need to pay you at the very juiciest rate. So this rate up here should be higher than these rates, but you want the juice here right immediately over quota, so that this is the bait. The rate right here is the bait in your comp plan. And so you want to make that as attractive as possible. And I would challenge you to make it high enough that you in fact would be unwilling to continue at that rate indefinitely. So when your salesperson says, wait, you're reducing my rate over 150, so is that my stopping place? The answer is you would never have seen this juicy rate if we couldn't reduce over 150. So I know that's a bridge too far for a lot of early stage companies, but just keep in mind that that kind of mechanism can de-risk your plan, be totally fair to your seller, and they'll stay motivated because this plan is still better for them than a straight line up to here, unless they're over 200% of goal. Okay. Another little moment if we want to.
Yes. And I'll ask this question now because I think so. Okay. So the question asked by someone is related to farmers and hunters, and those aren't roles. Okay. So, but I think pressing into this concept, I think it has to do with how are you thinking about, the curve of the payout as well as the mix that we talked about before between roles of acquiring net new customers versus renewal versus upsell, resell. Again, every organization kind of handles that a little bit differently. Some has, the account executive handled both net news as well as renewals. Some have account managers or, that have a quota for renewals and upsell and cross sell. Regardless, how do you think about setting up the mix in curve payout differently for those scenarios?
So your hunter role is usually your highest prominence role in the organization. So they're going to have the most incentive-rich pay mix across the whole organization, usually 50-50 in most businesses. Your pure farmer, let's think about why people are buying, why they're successful. They're successful because they're doing a good job of taking care of that account and servicing the account. But they're also very much successful because the offering is providing value to the customer. That's not something that the hunter caused. That's something that the business who developed the right offering and supported it correctly caused. So the pure farmer role is a relatively low prominence role. Now, in the farmer role, if there is a new business upsell opportunity, cross-sell opportunity, I'm going to be confusing now and tell you that the account retention, business retention part of the farmer role is relatively low prominence, but the upsell part of the role is higher prominence. So when you put the plan together, if you have a component in the plan for account maintenance, it's going to probably have relatively modest upside and it's going to have a relatively tight performance range, which means if they get to over 110% of their goal for account maintenance, that might be rock star performance. Whereas for the new business piece, it's probably got a higher payout per dollar and it probably has less acceleration because you're expecting a lot more variability in performance on the new business part of the farming role. So embedded in a farming role with upsell, cross-sell responsibility is a lower prominence motion and a higher prominence motion. So
Yeah.
a sophisticated concept, but that's the answer.
Great.
Overall, however, the hunter is the higher prominence role and the farmer is the lower prominence role between the two of them. And The strategic large account manager, who is probably doing both, is a highly compensated, relatively low prominence role.
Perfect. Excellent. Let me ask one more question that is sort of related to what we're talking about here in terms of curves and the shapes. You might actually have another section on this later on, which is when you hire your first, or when you first hire, any seller, especially for companies that are selling products that require a longer sales cycle. What are your thoughts about, concepts like draws and maybe
I'm
for
just going to refer you to a web page because it's too long of an answer. It's a
okay,
really
okay,
important question, and I don't want to gloss over it. I'll
got it.
tell you my favorite option, which is a declining guarantee, which would share the risk well with the salesperson, expect them to be building pipe and getting trained and doing all those things, but pay them on the core plan from their first sale. So there's no reason to wait until the draw period is over to maximize their earnings. But for more about that, go to the Signal Group, put into the search bar, type new hire comp, and the blog post that will explain that to you much better will pop up
Okay.
with an
Right. I'll
example.
include that in the follow-up. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yep. Okay, we've got 3 minutes left, and I'm not going to get through everything. I got through a lot here. This is just some examples of the same payout curve shown 3 different ways. This talks about how frequently you pay and when would you pay. Usually more frequently is better. Sometimes you want to pay less frequently. Timing, when do you finish paying for a sale? Are you paying at booking? Are you paying at invoice? Are you paying at cash? This slide answers that question. This is about how you test your comp plans with some links to the different model examples on our website, and emphasize the fact that communication is really important. We've been doing questions. We'll come back to next steps in a moment, but first I want to point out there's an entire section I never intended to present, which is the pitfalls that sometimes are problems for companies. These are the pitfalls that are covered, and for every one of them, we've got a page that says, here's how you know if you've got it, here's what causes it, here's what it costs you, and here's a solution to it. So it's sort of a troubleshooting guide for your comp plans that's at the end of this deck. And then at the very end, there's some information about the Signal Group and me. But let's go right back here to next steps.
Awesome. Excellent. So we're going to wrap up. Maybe I could just ask one final question, Donya, and this is for the interest of our founders that are just kind of figuring out how to build a sales organization. What would you say is the biggest thing to do or consider when they are hiring their first sales rep? Because as we can already appreciate in this last hour, sales comp plans can be pretty complex and there's a lot of different moving parts. For a founder that's just new to this, what's the main thing to keep in mind?
Have a reasonable idea of what they should produce and what you want to pay them, and ground your plans in that. Do not give them any sense that they have an everlasting right to any particular commission rate on what
Mm,
they sell. Focus on your intention to pay them their market value for producing what you need produced. And the commission rate is derived from that. Fundamentally, a commission rate is target incentive divided by sales production. Keep that in mind.
Perfect. That's an awesome answer. Thank you.